4 years ago from today, there was a blackout in my town that lasted for 3 days. It began on a Tuesday night, right as I was driving back home from work. I remember to be listening to some techno beats from the 90s and having a solo party in my car when all the lights in town went out and we were engulfed in darkness. I live in a small town of 1,300 people that's located in a remote region. Out here, when things stop working, we don't expect them to be repaired anytime soon. Therefore, I stopped by a general store and bought some extra candles before heading home. I went to bed early that night since there was nothing better to do. The next morning, I went to work like any other days, but things at work were a bit different from the usual. You see, I work at a local restaurant that's been doing business in the same spot for the last 70 years. We get lots of customers during lunch and dinner, but normally mornings are slow and we use that time to prepare for the busy lunch hour. On that day, however, the restaurant was fully packed, so much so that many were standing. I went up to my boss and asked him about the crowd. He said, "They're not here for the food. Mr. and Mrs. Pavlov have gone missing last night. Alexei hasn't come to work either. People are scared." Later that day, we got the word from the police that they were out searching for the missing people. Apparently, there were more than just 3 missing. My coworker Alexei was one of them. My boss went to his home to check on him. He told us that the house was trashed and that the entire family was missing. Alexei, along with his wife and children, were gone. My boss emptied out the fridge that day and distributed all the food to us, the workers, and also to the regular customers. They were going to go bad without power. There was no point in letting them rot in the fridge. We went home early that day and I spent the extra time knocking on neighbors' doors. I had way too much food for myself, so I gave away whatever food I couldn't eat. I went back home after that and began preparing for the night. I placed 1 flashlight in the living room, 1 in the bathroom, and the last one in my bedroom. Then, as day turned to night, I lit up a few candles around the house. The last thing I did was to grab my rifle and place it under the bed. You know, just in case, with all the people going missing. That night, I fell asleep early again. But a few hours thereafter, I was awoken by the loudest and the most disheartening scream I had ever heard. I got up like a spring recoiling, grabbed my rifle, then ran outside onto the street. As soon as I hit the pavement outside, I heard a scream coming from the south of the street. I was about to run toward it, but then another scream came from Mrs. Pedrop's. I ran toward Mrs. Pedrop's since she lives across the street from mine. There were 5 continuous screams until I was able to break the door down. Then it became eerily quiet as the only things I could hear were the wind, my footsteps, and me breathing. My heart was pounding as I entered Mrs. Pedrop's home. I couldn't see anything because no candles were lit inside the house. Or perhaps the intruder had put them out. Whatever the case may have been, I had forgotten to bring the flashlight and thus I was searching for Mrs. Pedrop semi-blind. I took a quick look at the first floor, then headed straight to the second floor. I figured that's where the bedroom is and I should be looking for her there. I heard a brief rustling as I got closer to the bedroom. I had been in this house many times before when Mrs. Pedrop was a young woman. Her children and I were friends back then and we used to hang out here all the time. I know the layout of this house like the back of my hand. So anyway, I slowly made my way toward the bedroom. The door was open, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I called out for Mrs. Pedrop, but she didn't answer back. So I entered the bedroom and almost at the same time, something jumped out the window, smashing against the glass in the process. I ran toward the window and saw a large black figure running toward the forest in the east. It was carrying Mrs. Pedrop on his shoulder. The jump from the second floor didn't seem like it had any effect on it. I went outside and gave chase with all I had, but after 10 minutes, I was huffing and puffing, unable to keep pace with that. It took me about 20 minutes to get back home, and by then the police were already on our street. They were searching the house down the road. I placed my rifle on the roof of their vehicle, stepped a few meters away, then waited for them there. When they came out, I told them everything that had happened and what I saw. The sun rose a few hours thereafter, and one of the police officers came to my house to return my rifle. I asked him what he had found out so far, but I could tell he was reluctant to give me a straight answer. So I told him, "Hey, I'm sure you got your orders and all, but you must understand, we might have to spend a few more nights without the lights, and you and I both know there aren't enough police officers in town to keep everyone safe. If you know something, you must tell me. You have to at least tell us what we are fighting against." The man rubbed his forehead, contemplating on what to do. Seconds passed as he spoke. 10 people have been confirmed to have gone missing so far, and we have 6 witnesses, which includes you. The witnesses have described the thing, the creature, quite similarly to what you've described to us. We think that you've all seen the same type of creatures, meaning there's more than one of them running around. I promise you that's all I know. Go speak to Mr. Volkov if you want to know more. The old man knows about this a lot more than I do. The police officer said those words and left. As for me, I took his advice and went to see Mr. Volkov to get some answers. Mr. Volkov told me that he didn't know much about the creatures either. However, one thing that he could tell me is that the creatures have been living in the forest for at least 70 years. Mr. Volkov is 82 years old today, and he told me that the same thing had happened when he was 10 years old and another one when he was 30. This happened 3 times in his lifetime, but he thinks it's been happening for much longer than that. There are legends of the creatures going back hundreds of years. The new generations, so my generation and the newer, had never heard of it because people stopped caring for those things. We like to think that we're still tough, hardened people who live on the border of the wild and the civilization. But the truth is, television, video games, and the internet had made us soft and as well as uncaring of our own culture. We've forgotten what's to be us. We never got ready for a day like this because we didn't have the capacity in us to think beyond what's for dinner and what's on TV. We've become these simpletons who only look forward and never care to look back. In any event, that wasn't going to change anytime soon. All that mattered to me at that point in time was to survive. So I got together with the neighbors and we decided to spend the night together in one house, that being my house. When the sun went down, we had a dozen men sitting by the windows and doors, just about covering all points of entry around the house. Women and children were huddled by the fireplace. We were all scared, desperately waiting for morning to come. In a way, it was kind of nice. It felt like before when I was a kid. People used to come over all the time and we would sit by the fire and talk. We actually gave a damn about one another. We were all like an extended family. It reminded me of that time. But anyhow, the night came and went just like that. We were all safe, at least the people on our street. We gave each other big hugs in the morning before they all went to their homes. It seemed like we were beginning to care for each other again. Later that day, the power had come back and that ended the incident with the creatures. Sadly, the people who went missing were never found again. According to Mr. Volkov, the creatures take the people to turn them into their own. Maybe that's how they replenish their numbers, or maybe they're gathering an army. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, people began to leave town after that. Mr. Volkov wasn't surprised. He told me that in time, new residents would replace the natives and life would go on. I'm not so sure about that. Today, we have less than 900 people living here, and I'm sure the number will go down even lower around this time next year. It's sad to see my neighbors living one by one. Driving down the street, I see houses that are boarded up and slowly being reclaimed by nature. I guess it's understandable under the circumstances, but I do wonder if they'll be any safer in the cities. As for me, I haven't made up my mind yet, but I'm thinking of moving near my sister. She moved away when she married a government official who was sent here for a few months on an assignment. She says she misses me, and I miss her too. Besides, our parents had passed away years ago, and there's no more reason for me to stay here. I wonder if the creatures will ever come back. Actually, I'm sure they will, but I suppose by the time they do, people would have forgotten all about it again. It's crazy to think that unknown creatures still roam the Earth in the age of computers and satellites. That makes me wonder what else there is that we don't know about. Because I really think we know very little, at least as far as the average person is concerned. With all that said, I think the real question to ask is, how much does the government know about this?